It's wonderful to welcome J. Arcanian to this podcast. I was introduced to him through one Jess Dare of Book Savvy Publications. He recently authored a new novel titled Three Illusions, and it is introduced to me, at least, as from an perspective of someone with Asperger's, and it is interested in philosophy and critical thinking. So some of those areas are part of my expertise and experience. So, JJ, welcome to the
Great.
program. How are you?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Okay, so tell me a bit about your background, both as a writer and as a person.
Well, my professional background, I have a company that I assist companies to get ISO 9001, aerospace, medical, and other quality and environmental management system. I assist them in getting registered and I conduct audits and I perform technical writing. I've had my company since 1998. So I've been at this a very long time. So that's my professional background. I mean, I have a history that goes back further than that. Um, I am slightly older than you. I'm 72. That usually catch people off guard because I have a baby face or whatever. But anyway, that said, what really got me started in writing happened really goes back to my youth because I had Asperger's, but they didn't have Asperger's identified or defined back in the day. It was just, probably I was just considered a problem child. Let's put it that way. I was probably considered somebody who just gave his parents and teachers fits because it wasn't really something that manifested in the classroom, but it was absolutely something that I experienced was a hindrance with regard to socialization. I had problems with picking up on social cues and so forth. And I didn't even know this until I was in my 40s, quite frankly. It was not something that that manifested in a very, very obvious manner. It was subtle. It was very underlying. Um, Reading, for instance, was difficult. Not that I couldn't read quickly. It was that I couldn't maintain my focus. I could not, I was off thinking of something else while I was on a chapter, while I was on a paragraph even. So that continues to this day. But you overcome that through hard work and perseverance is the bottom line.
Mhm.
So that kind of gives you a little bit of a glimpse. I'll elaborate as we go on, but I don't want to dominate this conversation.
I see.
So you have some questions you'd like to pose?
Of course. Yeah. So I like to focus on two aspects of I guess how of yourself, your life in this novel, namely, living with Asperger's and philosophical inquiry. I'm embarrassed to say that I haven't made too far into the novel. I've made like to five or so chapters, and
Okay.
it is so far I haven't been able to make out the plot yet, to my embarrassment too. So tell me, well, first, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, in when I was in college in the very early 70s, um, some of the influential books of my generation were Siddhartha, Herman Hesse, some other Herman Hesse novels, Narcissus and Goldman, Journey to the East, things of that nature. Also, Richard Bach wrote a book called Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. Um, they were kind of mystical, they were kind of philosophical, and they were influential on that generation. Be Here Now, Bhagaram Das was a influential book um, on my generation. So I always could see writing something that was more contemporary and that could provide new generations, Gen Z, for instance, was something akin to what influenced me. I can't place myself in the categories of some of those authors because they were too great, and I'm not that grandiose. I'm not that impressed with myself. The fact is, though, is that I tried to style Three Illusions in a fashion that would unearth certain concepts to people in Gen Z, for instance, that I feel are kind of absent, with exceptions. There's always exceptions to everything.
Mhm.
There are people who are very astute in every generation, from my experience.
I see. Yeah. So what are some of the things that you find missing in Generation Z that you'd like to illuminate?
Some of the things that I see missing are people's desire or ability or both to pay attention. People are not adequately focused on current events. I thought somebody was at the door, excuse me. So that's a pet peeve of mine that I kind of share with the protagonist. The book is not autobiographical, but I think everybody in their writing will reveal some things about the way they think and see the world. And I'm no different in that respect. You have to pull from what you have experienced, and then the story will come out in the process. At least it did for me.
So what is the story of the novel?
It's very protagonist driven. Dylan Maxwell is the name of the protagonist. And can you excuse me 1 second while I just go to the store? Back. Sorry. But I don't want to reveal too much because I want people to read the book. I think they'll enjoy the book. I think that they'll enjoy the Three Illusions, and it is sure it's fiction, but in the same breath, it can be applied to life in current time, in real time, given the amount of division that's in this world, and especially it seems in the United States. It's it calls on people to be responsible for their own actions on themselves and for themselves, and to be more, let's say, do more investigation with regard to topics that are of importance, whether it's political, whether it's any topic for that matter. With the advent of the internet, there's no excuse for people not to dig and find out the storyline on everything. If something bothers them, they should be able to investigate it adequately to find the truth and extract what's really important to know about it, and be open-minded enough to get to the root cause of issues. Part of the problem is that people are trying to prove themselves right much of the time, and they will subscribe to anything that confirms their bias. So they would rather listen to a news channel, for instance, that just echoes what they already think instead of getting another perspective. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. Um, so uh, you've you also revealed in the novel as well as in the email that Jess sent me that you have an interest in philosophy and philosophical inquiry. So tell me
Yes.
when that began for you.
Well, that's been an ongoing pursuit. I've always, I'm not degreed in philosophy. That's not. I would not make that claim. However, am fairly well read, and I have certain quotes that hit home, and I have a tendency to tune into those quotes, those things that really mean something to me, that I can apply to the world. And, Plato, Socrates, Nietzsche, and others, make statements to that effect, or make statements that have impacted me. One in particular, Nietzsche said, sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. And I find that very interesting. I think that's quite true. People they key in on self-preservation, but that goes beyond just putting, food on the table, a roof over their head, and clothes on their back. We're in a very somewhat of a shallow society, in my estimation, the selfie generation, as I call them. Too concerned about looking in a mirror, too concerned about how they look, how they appear in appearances, when in reality that has very little to do with what's important in life, in my estimation.
Yes. So you mentioned being frustrated by divisions in American society, and I'm assuming that you are an American. So do you
Yes.
believe that you know, the political manifestations of this division revealed a deeper division, or do you believe that it's just limited in the political sphere?
Do I believe it would what?
So the political divide, like, do they reveal a deeper societal divide, or are they just political?
No, I think there's societal divisions, but I think they're very much rooted in religion.
Hmm.
Most wars have been, have a foundation in religion. There's over 4,000 religions from my investigations, from my research. And I believe that religion has everything to do with division. In the United States, there's a movement from the right wing to, infiltrate politics and have it controlled, all in a Judeo-Christian way of viewing the world. Not everybody thinks like that. Not everybody believes that. I think there's room in this world for everybody. And I think imposing your will upon others does everybody a disservice. And I think that's where a lot of the division stems from. I think that's where a lot of the division has its origins. And religion has everything to do with it. I was raised in a Catholic grade school up through the 8th grade, and I've been in recovery ever since. I joke in that fashion, but there's quite a bit of truth to it. I mean, we are indoctrinated since we are little kids in the United States to a large degree, and in European countries as well, from what I understand. We have, things beat into us almost. We get hit from every side. If I were to tell people that I still believe in Santa Claus, they would think it's ridiculous, right? Well, I kind of feel the same way about some religious beliefs, and I know that's a heck of a thing to say, and a lot of people have a lot of difficulty with that. But it served me well, and it's very liberating when you realize that everything is not always so cut and dry. It's not always as it seems. And that has its roots in philosophy as well. From Marx saying that religion is the opium of the people, to other philosophers who have made similar statements that basically allude to religion being more of a problem than it is a solution.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think I do talk about religion and spirituality in this podcast a lot, since
Two different things.
Yeah.
Two different things. Religion and spirituality
Yeah.
are not mutually exclusive. They're different things.
Okay. How would you differentiate between the two?
Well, first of all, spirituality, one thing I know is that whatever I think of God, I know I'm not God. That's spiritual in and of itself. I can't fathom, I can't understand how anybody could dismiss the notion that there are life forms elsewhere in this and other universe, right? And alien life forms, much more sophisticated than us and have been over billions of years. It is just play the odds, if nothing else. But there's a lot of evidence out there, and I don't have to dwell on that to recognize that that's a probability, not just a possibility. It's a probability. I believe in science. I believe I believe data over hypothetical situations. It's kind of like the vaccines for COVID. You know, I'll get the next one as soon as it's out. That mRNA mRNA research and methodology has been around for a long time. It's proven very well. I've had, I think, 6 vaccines right now at my ripe age. I never had any side effects, and side effects don't make them less important. I think the vaccines save millions of lives, quite frankly. That's just an illustration.
Okay.
I may be going off on a tangent. I don't mean to. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So I have few questions to be raised from your, I guess, your responses. I do deal with religion and spirituality on this show, because
Yes.
I view it as having a wealth of intellectual and philosophical content to be learned from the great religions. So I wonder,
Right.
to what extent do you see the same thing? Like, some of the great religions, whichever ones you find, can be a good wellspring of philosophical inquiry and even debate.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point. I think that there are plenty of things you can extract from most religions that are very useful, beneficial, and accurate. But that doesn't mean that are they go much further than that. Whatever somebody can get out of the religion, I'm all for it. I am not about to tell somebody what is important to them or what they should have, how it makes them happy. For instance, in alcohol and drug recovery, people need to have a God of their understanding in order to stay clean and sober. I would never, ever keep people from that. I would want them to have that, whatever it takes. So again, there's room enough in this world for everyone. And it seems that people war over religion, one group versus another. And I don't have to look very far. We don't have to look very far to see that going on right now in the world. And how much strife it causes, how many deaths it causes, how much destruction it causes. I remember back in the day, we used to have T-shirts that used to say, "What if we threw a war and nobody showed up?" It's a nice concept. I like that. Now, there's different ways of viewing the world, and I may be out on one extreme, but it's not an imposing extreme. It's more of an accepting extreme. I believe in acceptance, tolerance. I believe in living and let living. That's the bottom line. Let people be who they are, so long as they're doing no harm. Do no harm is key.
That's it. Okay. So my second question regarding your response would be, you said that you believe in science and the scientific method. Well, I suppose that also implies a sort of faith in, well, maybe not
Sure.
a deity, but a method, and that you believe that by applying this method, you get the right conclusions most of the time. So
Sure.
I think, for people who, I guess, reject religion but believe science, they are exercising their beliefs in some sense.
I agree. Absolutely. They are exercising a form of faith.
Mhm.
I get that. Um, I'm not the deity portion of it that you touched on is key to me. I may not believe in a deity, but I do know that there are powers out there much greater than me. And spiritually, I mean, there are too many things in this world that go beyond coincidence for there not to be spiritual components to life. And so I'll never dismiss that completely. I'll never poo-poo it. I'll say, yeah, sure. I can embrace that without being, you know, somebody who subscribes to one of the big religions, for instance. But yeah, there's room for everybody and lots of trains of thought. But it's liberating when you don't feel like you are confined to one way of viewing the world. It's liberating when you feel that you can change your mind, that you can say, you know what, that makes sense. I'll go along with that. Or you just played the devil's advocate and you made perfect sense. And I think you helped me allay some of my fears, for instance. There's a lot of ways of viewing it. And there are no universals in that respect. There are universals, but not in the respect I just, tried to go through because I understand that I reserve the right to change my mind. Let's put it like that.
Mhm. So you mentioned having difficulties reading as a result of your Asperger's. So I want,
Mhm.
as of today, have has that difficulty been managed in some capacity?
Oh yeah, it's been absolutely managed. I write. I mean, I just have to repeat and work harder to maintain my focus because the problem isn't comprehension. Never has been. I can read something and comprehend it perfectly. The problem is that my mind goes off onto to something else. I bore very easily. I rewrote Three Illusions 50 times if I rewrote it once. And since it's been in print, I read it again and found 50 more things that I would adjust, change, or whatever. Um, it's the nature of the beast. I don't think I'd ever be completely satisfied with anything I create. I think I would always want to modify something. Yeah, but at some point, you just have to say, okay, enough.
Mhm.
Let's move on. So the same thing goes with reading. Sometimes when I would read a page, for instance, I would think, did I miss something? Is the author trying to convey something that I didn't pick up on? And I'll read it again until I'm satisfied that I didn't miss anything. So I mean, when I was much younger, I mean that used to be a bigger problem because let's say I was studying for an exam, all of a sudden I would have to reread the text several times in order to get what somebody else may have done once. So it was more work for me. It wasn't that I got anything less out of it, it's just that I was off somewhere else and I was thinking elsewhere. My my concentration wasn't as good. I like cue games. I love three cushion billiards, for instance, and got pretty proficient. But maintaining my focus, I would miss eventually because my concentration would break. That's why I miss concentration. I couldn't sustain it as long as I'd like to, because I've seen guys that are just tremendous. They never lose their concentration, and I ask myself, how the hell do they do that?
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. Um, I know from both reading about Asperger's and also living with it, that despite all of the, I guess, disadvantages and drawbacks that you may experience socially, an advantage that you do have is that you have an ability to notice things that may not be noticed by most other people. So, to what extent do you find that ability to be helpful in, well, both your daily life and writing the book?
Oh, that's interesting that you would say that. Oh, it's absolutely true. You notice how people react in situations, and even though I can't turn that inward and realize how pick up on social cues that apply to me, I can see other things quite clearly. Um, Insecurities. I can see people's insecurities a lot of times, or believe I can. Maybe it's an illusion of my own. I don't know. But no, I think I can see that very clearly. I go to the gym and I notice how people are focused on the mirror, you know, to an extreme extent. And I think, that's not healthy. It's none of my business. I'd never say anything, but I think it's not healthy. They must be very insecure. And in many cases, they are. That's my perception. The same goes with everything from politics to philosophy. When people start voicing their opinions, and it's pretty easy for me to recognize if they don't have a lot of information. It's pretty easy for me to recognize when they don't have a lot of experience. I think the experience part is the easiest one. I think everybody can see that up beyond a certain age. I think that has everything to do with the age of somebody. This once they start getting experience, they don't view the world quite like they did 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I think they view the world a little differently. And I think that's normal. But that's why they call it experience. No, life's a funny thing. And it is definitely a marathon, not a sprint. Absolutely.
So I wonder, do you find it easier, so to speak, to communicate with people who are, so to speak, on the spectrum?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
I think that I can relate to some of those people, but they don't always identify themselves as being on the spectrum. So sometimes you don't know. The tells for being on the spectrum can be very subtle. Most people would never have guessed that I was on the spectrum. And when I've told some people that I was Asperger's, a couple of them would go, no, or no way, or whatever. And I said, no, absolutely. Others would say, oh, yeah, I've known that for years. Depends on how well I knew them, and vice versa. But I have more empathy for people who are on the spectrum. I have a niece who's on the spectrum. I don't know if she knows it, but I have a lot of empathy for her. I can relate to some of her experiences that I know have been very trying for her in her life. So in that respect, I can relate, but it's not necessarily a better communication with them. It's just I can empathize with them. I wish I could help, and sometimes I can, but you do what you can. In cases where you think you can influence something favorably. That's all you can do, is you can do what you can. You try to be good company.
Of course. And I suppose since there are currently no medical cure for Asperger's, the best you can do is, well, you can benefit from an early discovery, but I suppose you can learn from, that diagnosis, the famous invocation to know thyself in order to mitigate some of the difficulties it can bring. So
Yeah,
how have you
well said. Well said. You're absolutely right. No, I mean, knowledge is powerful. And when you have a diagnosis, you know where to look, you know what to do, or at least you know what direction to look, I should say. It's hard to find out exactly what to do all the time, but at least it gives you a lead. At least it gives you some way of saying, okay, I might do better if, and move forward in that respect.
So have you managed to mitigate those difficulties in, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a young man. I don't think about it anymore. The Asperger's, it comes into play, in my, private life sometimes, because some people pick up on it more than I do. But otherwise, I'm very structured. I have a lot of structure in the way I lead my life. I have a business to run. I'm only semi-retired, even though I'm old enough to be fully retired. I refuse to yield because I think when I stop, I'm then going to wait for rigor mortis to set in. It's as though, that's the beginning of the end. I don't want to stop, therefore. I want to keep going. I make furniture. I write, and I still have maintained clients, even though I no longer call on my long distance customers because I don't care to be on the road like I used to. So I've made a lot of adjustments, but it's not a dull life. It keeps coming at you, and there are plenty of things that pique my interest and utilize my time quite fully. I have a lot of things that keep me very engaged.
That's wonderful to hear. So, on the topic of illusions, I suppose we should discuss Plato and Socrates now. I've just alluded to earlier with the "Know Thyself" invocation.
Mhm.
So, in the Republic, Plato mentions the image of the cave. So, I suppose since I don't have to spell out what the cave means to you, but for me, it's an invocation for thinking people to reach out to find the truth behind appearances and illusions, etc. But at the same time, in the Republic, Plato believes that a well-ordered polity or regime has to have a noble lie. So an illusion gets the people going that provides a certain purpose for a polity to function. So how do you reconcile these two ideas of this?
Well, I view that as somewhat manipulative.
Hmm?
And as a result, I don't necessarily agree with that method. I like the idea where Plato said that opinion is the medium between knowledge and ignorance. And that to me dovetails very nicely in with dialectics, which is, opposing ideologies, working it out because they both are sharing one common denominator, and that is they want the truth. And they're not fearing compromise in order to get to the truth. The problem lies when they are trying to impose their will on the other. Because dialectics is a great problem-solving methodology. And I believe Plato was a problem solver in that respect. And I think that statement when he said that excuse me, opinion is the medium between knowledge and ignorance. I think that is almost a definition of dialectics in and of itself, even though dialectics in the book I define a little more clearly. In fact, I give actual dictionary definitions of it in one spot. But dialectics is one of the key things that is that I expound on in the book, but I don't care to divulge a whole lot more because, again, I don't want to give away some of the things that people might find interesting.
Okay, so tell me about the definition of dialectics that you gave in the book.
Well, I believe it's simply put is when two people having differing opinions, but each in search of the truth, hash it out, investigate, they compromise, and it's taking a thesis, an antithesis, and coming up with a synthesis, if you will. That's dialectics.
Yes, I suppose that's the Hegelian definition of it. But of course,
Pretty close, yeah. But you're more versed in philosophy than I am. I can tell that already. But yes, it is more Hegelian.
Yeah, I try to
Dialectical materialism.
Yeah, but I guess one question that can be raised with the dialectical process from Socrates to Hegel is that, well, for a dialectical process to function, the two or more parties must share this commonality that is they are interested in the truth. Um, Now, the contrary to this has been, I suppose, depicted in the Gorgias dialogue, where Socrates dialogues with Callicles, where Callicles, his opponent, do not care very much about the truth. He cares about, well, as you alluded to, imposing his will upon others. And
That sounds familiar, painfully familiar.
yeah, so the problem has been, I guess, predicted and depicted, 5,000 years before our time. But
Hmm.
nevertheless, Callicles was a great influence on Nietzsche in the 19th century. Uh,
Hmm.
Nietzsche has this famous invocation of the will to power. So, and I believe in Beyond Good and Evil, he says that, well, this will to truth should be discarded because it limits human potential. Instead, humans must become as powerful as they can. So tell me about your reading of Nietzsche. How much of his thinking do you follow?
I really haven't read that much Nietzsche.
No.
And in when I did, what little I did was many, many years ago. So I really would not do it justice to even attempt to go down that path.
Mhm.
Um, but one thing I did extract from philosophy, my an interest in philosophy, is that I don't dismiss any particular philosopher and place him in a corner, in a category that is derogatory. Politically speaking, you hear people say, "Oh yeah, Marx. I mean, what a communist, this, that, and the other." No, wait a minute. Don't paint that broad stroke. He was brilliant. He brought a lot to the world. And he said and developed a lot of ideas that are of great value to the world. And the problem is that people display their ignorance when they make that type of statement. And politically in the United States right now, that type of dialogue goes on way too much. And people don't know what they're talking about. And they would do well just to stay quiet and take it all in and research a little and see whether or not they were mistaken. And then invariably they find out that they were. No, there's too much. I don't have to agree with somebody to think that they have a lot of value. Somebody can say something that I totally disagree with, but that doesn't mean I have to disagree with everything that's in their mind. They may have a lot of features that I absolutely love. And so that's where I would prefer to put my focus. I would rather put my attention on the good in them. It's hard to find that in some people, I'll admit, but it's there. Sometimes people make it very difficult to see the good in them, but it's there. Um, and philosopher wise, I mean, I don't have to understand. A lot of philosophy was very difficult to read. They're tough reads. Hegel was a tough read. And I haven't read a lot of Hegel, but I read enough to know he was a tough read, as was Marx, and others. Um, and a lot of it has to do not just with their the level of their critical thinking and thought, but also has to do with another time, 100 or 200 years removed, changes how people speak to a large degree, and that just compounds the issue. So um, that also is mentioned in the book, where there's something in there where he says to a fellow college student that was having problems with a philosophical course or book that he was reading, and the protagonist suggested that he read it again, that if he kept it up, he would get it. Just trudge on, just keep at it, you'll get it. Just trying to encourage him, because everything can be comprehended. It just may take a little bit more practice, right? Practice, does make not necessarily always perfect, but it'll get you better. Let's put it that way.
It's, of course, not to be bogged down with Hegelian/Marxist analysis of the dialectic, which is a concept too high for either of us to reach at this point. Um, Tell me about the virtue of skepticism when it comes to philosophical thinking.
Oh, I think it's healthy. Skepticism, I think people need to be skeptical of a lot of things. And there's plenty to be skeptical of in modern society. AI scares the hell out of me. Um, and people fear that which they don't understand. I think that's uh, kind of a truism. I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but nonetheless, I when I fear something, I know that I'm probably not informed on whatever that topic may be. AI, case in point. I fear AI because I see all these things that could happen, but then again, I know nothing about AI, for instance. And that's skepticism. I think it's healthy for that reason. I think skepticism is very healthy.
Yes. As I've alluded to earlier, I suppose you kind of have to believe that humans have a natural will or desire to seek out the truth in order for dialectics to be possible.
Yes.
Is that something that you believe humans have a natural desire to seek the truth?
Unfortunately, I don't think everybody does. No, I think that people find comfort in their ignorance sometimes. Uh, Like-minded people, it's confirmation bias. They don't want to think that somebody else may be right because it boggles their mind. So consequently, they will tune into another news source that gives information that is more in keeping with their way of viewing the world, and it just confirms their bias and it supports them. It's that those perpetual sound bites that happen from some news sources. It's absurd, but it's very prevalent in the United States from a couple sources that I don't even need to mention.
Mhm.
People probably know who I'm talking about. But it's just the same words over and over. They keep repeating the same BS.
Yes. So to go back to Plato's famous analogy, there are some people who would prefer to be in the cave rather than to be out of it.
Yes, yes. To implicate rather than what?
To be in the cave, the allegory.
Oh, yeah, in the cave. Yeah, I thought you said implicate. Yes, yes. Ignorance is bliss in that respect. A lot of people like to keep their head in the sand. They don't want to know. Um, that's also very common. I couldn't do that. There's no way. But I can't deny them that right. They're free to live how they see fit, so long as they do no harm, which is key. That's not just for the medical profession. Do no harm, that is. That should be a way of life for people. As soon as they start, harming others, then they've overstepped. Then we need to somehow put a kibosh on that, and maybe they need some help.
Yes. And I suppose you, like me, believe that the dialectical process can be a way to remove people from the cave if they so chooses. So,
Yeah.
how can someone step away from ignorance into, I suppose, a more enlightened place?
I think they need some type of a revelation in a respect. I mean, sometimes, it can be just that light bulb that goes on. And that still happens, that life altering happening. That still happens. I think it's rare that it happens really gradually. I think it happens in a snap where they get something. And once you see something, you can't unsee it. Once I saw some things about religion, I couldn't undo it. I didn't want to, but I couldn't anyway. It's very liberating. And I think that's possible for a variety of topics other than religion also. I think that's possible for people to say, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be so fearful about science. Maybe I shouldn't fear getting a vaccine. You know, we have a resurgence of chickenpox in the United States, for crying out loud. That's been gone for years, or measles. And it's because people started getting away from and saying, oh, vaccine's not good, or it's this or it's that. And, you know, that's a bunch of hyperbolic BS, quite frankly. And, but they're entitled to their opinion. The problem is that it's impacting other people now. So they're doing harm. There was a time when polio was fairly commonplace in the United States, and they had vaccines for polio until it was gone. Are we going to wait for that to have a resurgence now? Because just so we can honor some people's rights? I don't know. I don't want to get too hypothetical in that respect, but nonetheless, there's a lot of troublesome thoughts out there when you start having all these people who think that their freedom of speech and thought needs to be taken to an extreme in a very, very dark direction.
Mhm.
You know, you make progress for centuries in this world, and then you have some people that want to take you back to the 1300s or whatever. Boggles my mind.
Yeah, and I suppose there are two components to the emotion and the state of fear. It can be helpful in that say if you have a natural fear of say the dark or high places, you would be more likely to keep yourself safe from, I guess, threats lurking in the dark or tall buildings. But at at a certain level, it can be a hindrance to, well, enlightenment. So I guess in your personal experience, how do you know uh, where that line is drawn?
I
So,
don't always,
yeah.
I think experience, I have to have faith in my experience, what I see, and try to think, am I hurting anybody in my decisions or in a direction that I take? And so long as the answer to that is no, then I'm pretty safe. But I don't know. There's a friend of mine from the east side of Michigan used to say, "I never miss an opportunity to keep your mouth shut." Well, I haven't been good at that.
Mhm.
you know, I have always, kind of had a little bit of a big mouth, even though it might not have been have any ulterior motives associated with it. It's just that, I have to learn how to just shut up sometimes. Um, so, I fly by the seat of my pants plenty in my life. And there's a time and a place for that. And I don't always choose well, but the older I get, the more often I seem to choose right.
Yes, yes, I can, yeah, completely sympathize with that. I can recall many a times when certain things I say get me into you know deeper and hotter water than I intended
Yes,
to be.
absolutely.
Yeah. So finally, do you believe that literary fiction can be a gateway to the truth?
Yes, I won't hesitate on that. Absolutely. There's a modicum of the truth in a lot of fiction, literary fiction particularly. Um, because a lot of what people write is based on their experience. It may go off in another direction than what they actually lived, but it may have some type of elements that mirror their life or that were founded on their experience. In my case, in point in Three Illusions, there were several uh, things that happened in Three Illusions that I extracted from my experiences. Now, it doesn't mean that the entire book is autobiographical. It surely is not. But nonetheless, no, you write what you know, and then you embellish or research to fill in the differences and to tell the story that you see. And that's how Three Illusions came to fruition. That's how I created it. Is I had a draft, and I had an idea in my mind of what the story I wanted to tell. but I had to keep rewriting it, reworking it, moving chapter to the front, moving a chapter here to the back, sentences, moving them around. It's quite a process. It's different than technical writing because I've written thousands of corporate documents, policies, procedures, boring stuff like that. And I do mean boring, very dry. So writing was never an issue. I have umpteen classes in Latin in my youth, and I've written thousands of corporate documents, but it's a different animal to write fiction, absolutely different. And I've started on a new book. I have a sequel coming out someday that I hope will be much better than Three Illusions.
Okay.
I think Three Illusions is good, but I think the next one will be even better.
All right. So I look forward to having the sequel out. Okay.
Yeah.
On that said, thank you very much, JJ Arcanian, for joining the show.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. You're an interesting guy.